大家下午好，欢迎来到硅谷百家谈。硅谷百家谈，立足硅谷，百家荟萃，谈技术，谈教育，谈职场，谈投资。今天我们很荣幸的和 Crimson 合作，请到了 Martin Walsh 给大家谈谈教育方面的话题。
大家好，我是 Will，我是 Crimson 教育集团的全球市场总监。今天呢，我想跟大家见面去，跟大家介绍一下 Crimson 教育集团是一个什么样的机构。然后之后呢，会有请到我们今天的这个主讲嘉宾 Martin Walsh 来给大家讲一下这个疫情期间这个英美的，尤其是美国的大学在这个招生方面对于招生有哪些影响，然后大家应该怎么去做，或者是更重要的，就是因为他是前斯坦福大学的这个招生官，所以他会给大家讲一下，在这个招生官在审核材料的时候，大概是一个什么样的一个流程，所以大家就知道，作为学生，从学生的角度来说，我们怎么去准备，然后作为这个招生官的角度来说，他们怎么去招。那 Crimson 教育集团呢，其实我们是一个，应该说现在差不多是全球最大的一个升学指导机构。很多时候我在这么说的时候，大家都认为 Crimson 教育集团可能是一个中介公司，但是其实不是这样的。我们的这个目标呢，是要在学生很小的时候就开始对他们去培养，让他们具备足够的能力去考到自己未来的大学，然后在大学里能够很好的去毕业，然后在未来找到非常好的工作。所以我们的这个培训的重点是从小的时候就开始让他们不光是具备有很强的学术能力，同时还具备很强的这种软性的技能，包括像类似于时间管理啊、自我管理啊，所有这些软性的技能，然后帮助他们真正的去具备实力，自己可以去申请这些顶级的大学。所以我们更想是把我们自己看成是一个教育机构。一会儿呢，我会先请 Martin 给大家去讲一下，这可能是大家今天最主要来听的这个讲座的一个原因。先给大家讲一下这个申请的一些趋势之类的。最后我会给大家介绍一下 Crimson，我们是怎么样帮助我们自己的孩子的。然后 Crimson 还有很多非常这个优秀的这种教育资源，大部分都是免费的，可以介绍给大家一起来看一下。那我们现在呢，就是我先把 Martin 请出来，我先给大家介绍一下这个 Martin 的主要的这个背景吧。Martin 呢是有12年的这个国际高中这个教育的辅导经验，然后他有10年的国际学校教育辅导培训经验，曾经4年在高校担任教务主任和招生负责人。那他现在是担任芝加哥大学的顾问委员会委员，然后他也是原来的这个斯坦福大学的前招生办副主任，所以他对整个这个流程和这个招生官是怎么样去审核是非常的清楚的。那现在我们就请大家听一下他给我们讲一讲他的经验。Martin, over to you.
Okay, I'm going to pull up my screen, I hope, if everything goes well here. And if you could confirm, Will, that you can see my screen.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, yep, okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking to you from my home. I live in San Francisco, California. When I was first approached to give this talk, it was sort of like, well, at first the idea was like, well, just tell us how universities make decisions. And I kind of rebelled. I was like, no, I think I want to do something a bit more interesting and up to date. And I said, I think I just want to really talk about what I saw in the most recent college application cycle. And in the process, I'm hoping that the audience will kind of learn how universities make their decisions, pick up on new vocabulary, and maybe start looking at college admissions, not from the perspective of the student, but from what's going on at the universities, in the admissions offices, particularly at private universities. So I've titled this talk, Yield Protection in the College Application Cycle, and hopefully I'll explain what all of that means. Most importantly, of course, I hope that I don't bore anybody too much. A little bit of an introduction. I've been kind of doing this for, 13 or 14 years on the high school end as a counselor. I've been training international school counselors for over 10 years. I did work for 4 years in a college admissions office at Stanford and at Santa Clara universities. I'm currently a member of the University of Chicago's Counselor Advisory Board. And I share that with you to say, like, I don't think I've got it all figured out, but I'm establishing some degree of expertise. More importantly, I also want to share a picture of me pre-COVID when I could get haircuts. Someday I hope to return to that particularly nice, clean look. Okay, so what happened? Thoughts on the college application cycle that really just concluded in the last maybe 24 or 48 hours. Well, in order for me to really do a deep dive and explain to you what happened, I think that we have to do two things. First, I think it's important to look at college admissions from the perspective of a university admissions office and recognize that college admissions is, in their eyes at least, a business. And second, everyone in the audience has to be comfortable with a term called yield and the role that yield plays in the college admissions process or in decision making. Now, the key thing about yield, has nothing to do with grades or testing or essays, So for all the students out there listening, like, this is kind of sometimes a little bit the part that's a little bit out of your control, Yield is basically defined as meaning the percentage of students that accept the admissions offer that I send out. And I promise you, yield is discussed far more thoroughly in the admissions office than, say, what makes for a good application essay. So yield is the percentage of students who accept the admissions offer made by the university. Now, it's not too complicated. If a college sends out 100 admissions offers and they get 10 deposits, their yield is 10%. A deposit is a student basically saying, I will be attending your university. Here is my money. As expected, super elite universities like Harvard and Stanford, they have pretty high yield. The yields there are really high, which means you can probably be more conservative with your admissions offers. You know that for every 100 offers you send out there, if you're Harvard, 83%, are going to kind of embrace that and say, Harvard, I'm joining your school, or 82% with Stanford. Then you can notice here, as I've shown you kind of a sample set, it starts to drop. Dartmouth, which is still an elite school, their yield is 64%. So therefore, they probably have to send out more admit offers than Harvard and Stanford. Bates, which is a wonderful school in Maine, shout out to my cousin's daughter who will be playing basketball there next year. Bates's yield is about 50%, so for every 100 admit offers they send out, about 50 kids are going to say yes. Santa Clara University, my alma mater, place where I worked, an amazing school with great business and engineering programs, not far from the headquarters of Apple Computers. Santa Clara University's yield is about 18%. So for every 100 admit offers they send out, about 18 kids, maybe a touch more this year, will make their way. All right, good. You're probably sitting there saying, and why exactly am I listening to this old guy ramble on a Sunday? I could be out in the sun playing tennis or doing something fun. I've heard from my East Coast people, you're getting very warm weather out there. The weather report in San Francisco is clear, windy, and the Dodgers keep beating the Giants. All right, so why do colleges care about yield? Well, first of all, again, think of admissions as a business. When you can predict your yield, you're able to predict tuition revenues. And for all parents out there that own their own business, like, half the battle is I just want predictability in my business. I don't want these huge waves of like lots of money one month, no money the next month. I have a friend that owns a restaurant. I swear to God, all he really talks about is like, I don't need to get rich. I just need predictability. So when you've got a high yield, you've got predictable tuition revenues. And this is what every dean wants. This is what every admissions office wants. Furthermore, yield is one of the factors used in determining ranking. High yield indicates high demand, which indicates it must be a great school. So therefore, you want a high yield because that means that, you've got a better ranking. So the ability to predict yields means you can admit fewer applicants. Lower admit rates equals greater selectivity. Increased selectivity equals higher ranking. Now, a quick aside for all the students out there listening, this is why sometimes I don't get too caught up in ranking. Notice that there's nothing in that equation that talks about having great professors or a particularly strong academic program. Again, one of my biggest surprises when I shifted from being a high school teacher to an admissions officer was leaving the world of education where you're talking to the students and interacting with them and entering the world of college admissions, which is very business minded. So colleges care about yield. They've always cared about yield. This is not a new thing. Here was what happened though. COVID hits in 2020. And quite frankly, that predictability, those models being run by universities exploded, and not in a good way, not in a good way at all. All right, so COVID chaos hit in the 2020 application cycle. The students that are in this year's freshman college class. Across the board in the United States, you saw a drop in just applicants, 400,000 or more, it is estimated 400,000 or more students opted not to go to college. So you saw just a drop in applications and the number of kids that were even thinking about going to college. There was also a huge decline in international student enrollment. Now, again, across the board, I'm going to say it was about 11%. There were some universities that saw a much, much larger drop. Male enrollment dropped by 6%. And finally, top colleges, and this is more what I noticed, top colleges last year in class of 2020, top colleges were going to their wait lists well before that May 1 deposit date. And I'm talking about super elite colleges that were pressing that panic button as early as mid-April, because all of a sudden it's like, we're not getting the deposits we need to go to our wait list. So 2020, in my opinion, caused some white hairs of worry on the heads of many admissions deans. And I would like to add as an aside, as someone that saw this a little bit, being a dean of admissions at an elite school is a pretty good gig. You're paid well, your kids are probably going to school for free, and you're probably living on campus, maybe in university funded housing. I mean, this is not the type of job where you're like, if I get fired, I don't care. This is one of those jobs where you're kind of like, I sort of want to keep this job. So I think that chaos was not a healthy period for those deans of admissions. So 2020 COVID hits, we've lost our predictability of tuition revenue. Rankings were kind of like, well, what does this even mean now all of a sudden, where it's like we're not getting the yield that we expected. It was not a good year from the business side of things for the admissions offices. Too much unpredictability. What do you do then? You regroup, and as you approach the 2021 cycle, which is the cycle that just finished, you say, okay, we've got to come up with some yield protection strategies that we can embrace to ensure that we're not going to our wait list on April 2nd, strategies that we can use to ensure that we've got predictability in our yields and that we keep our jobs, type of thing. Now, again, this is all stuff I've seen. I can't sit there and be like true across the board, but here's what I saw. One strategy I think that many admissions offices embraced was they relied on early decision. Now, for those new to the game, this is going to be a great kind of vocab lesson. Early decision is a bit like making reservation at the restaurant. You're promising that you're going to come to the restaurant. So you rely on early decision because early decision means that if admitted, you are expected to attend the university. I've got the term must go up there. That seems almost overly legally conscriptive, but I would say, if admitted on an early decision, you're expected to attend the university. The yield that I'm expecting on my ED admits is 100%. So early decision means you're sending off your application sometime in October to learn the decision sometime in December. That's the first round of college admissions, particularly for private universities. Early decision is great for the rich kids, right? Because you're not able to compare financial aid packages, but that's okay. Colleges want you to be full pay because they've just gone through COVID chaos and they've just lost money. And all of a sudden having money means a lot to them. So early decision is a way to not only get guaranteed yield, but often guaranteed full pay yield. You can always apply early decision to other early action schools. As dean of admissions, I don't care. If you apply ED and I admit you, I know you're coming to my school. So I absolutely saw that early decision universities were saying, you know, let's go for it here. Let's fill up quite a bit of the restaurant. My example would be, my case study today is going to be on Duke University, a school that is well known for both academics and athletics, situated in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. Let's little snapshot of what happened with Duke this year. In the early decision application round, they received 5,036 applications, and they sent out about 840 admissions offers. If they're expecting a 100% yield, which they'll get, that means that basically half their class was filled out of those 5,036 applications. So if I'm Dean of Admissions at Duke, I'm probably going to bed Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, feeling pretty good about things. I've got half my class filled, the restaurant's half filled. I only have to fill the other half of the restaurant in regular decision. Now, I know my yield in regular decision is not going to be 100% because the students are not bound to come to my university. But still, I've run my figures, and here's what I'm going to do. And so with Duke, they received roughly 44,000 applications in the regular decision pool. All they have to fill are 845 spots. They projected an admit rate of about 4%. They sent out 1,760 admit offers to fill up those 845 spots. So you can see, you know, it's not hard to do the math there of like, well, I'd rather be in that, you know, if I'm a student, I'd rather be in that 5,000 pool than 44,000. But more importantly, from an admissions dean perspective, this is what you want. This is the new normal. Colleges are going to want to fill up huge chunks of their classes in the ED rounds. We saw it with Duke. We see it here with Northwestern, 50% early decision admit. That's a reality. That's a very, very effective yield protection strategy. And I think that right now, for those students out there that are listening, and as you're developing your college list, and right now, if you're a rising senior coming to the end of your junior year, you should have a tentative college list. I certainly hope that part of your research is identifying those schools that offer an ED program, and when available, doing a deep dive into the data to find out, you know, what was the ED admit rate this year, what percentage of the class was filled. I think you might find that with some schools on your list, if you're not in that ED pool, your odds of being admitted are very, very low. I equate it with, you know, it's 7 o'clock at night on a Friday night or a Saturday night in New York City or San Francisco, and you have no dinner reservation. You know, it's kind of like the question then becomes, which McDonald's will you be eating at? You know, so colleges have embraced that as a yield protection strategy. The other yield protection strategy I saw a lot of universities, both public and private, embracing was they didn't deny kids. They waitlisted students. They created these ridiculously long wait lists. Now, why do you do that? Well, wait lists represent a yield insurance policy to the admissions teams. First of all, there's a weird thing about being pulled off a wait list, which is there's usually a very high yield. When a student is put on the wait list, mentally, whether they realize that they're doing it or not, mentally they kind of put that school on a pedestal, and they say to themselves, if I get pulled off that wait list, I'm definitely going, you know. So, you know, the yield on your wait list is always very high. Second of all, many colleges will attach an extra hurdle to those wait lists, those kids on the wait list, meaning to opt into the wait list, you have to write an essay or you have to do something. You know, this is another way for a university to kind of determine how interested you are in the school and therefore to predict their yield. So wait lists are great things. They're really good yield protection strategies. You've got applicants that are still alive. You can make them jump through a few more hoops to see just how interested they are in your university. Additionally, and this goes back to the business side of college admissions, there's a focus on full pay students when you go to the waitlist. By the time you're going to that waitlist, you've probably spent your financial aid dollars, so you're getting more students from higher income than middle and lower income groups when they're on the waitlist. So waitlists, I just saw universities, both public and private, really creating these massive waitlists, and they're slowly kind of chipping away at them in the last couple of weeks. Even Chicago, University of Chicago, Columbia, even they've gone to the waitlist for a few kids. It's like, and then some of the less elite schools have used the waitlist to round out the class. Has there been a ton of waitlist movement? No. Why not? Because the colleges use that first yield protection strategy, which is fill up on early decisions. So there's been slight waitlist movement, but I can't say it's been massive. But still, colleges created these massive waitlists. The other thing that I think is going to serve well for the colleges that will be around for a few more cycles, and that's going to be a test optional strategy. Now you might say, well, what does that have to do with yield? Well, quite simply, test optional strategies led to an explosion of applications, particularly to elite universities. I think that MIT was up like 50-something%. So all the parents and kids out there saw test optional as the chance to apply to an elite school without having the numbers. And that led to an explosion of applications, which leads to even more denies, even more denies for the college side, which makes them look even more elite and makes them look, more selective, and leads to those lower admit rates, which makes them look super cool, and therefore their rankings go up. And yes, sometimes I feel like colleges encourage applications just so they can deny you, but that's a whole other talk. No longer constrained by those pesky SAT and ACT admissions averages, kids felt emboldened. They literally filled up certain colleges, particularly the elite colleges, with their applications, creating these really large, often socioeconomically diverse applicant pools. So BU went up 12%. Now, any normal year, a 12% growth would be massive, but BU's growth was nothing compared to Tufts. Tufts went up 17%, which was absolutely nothing compared to Penn and Columbia, who were up 47 and 49%. Harvard was up 57%. MIT was up 62%. I think they're the winner, although I don't know Stanford's numbers because Stanford just stopped reporting them. I think they just said, too much to deal with. We're just not even going to report our numbers. So the reality is that I think test optional is going to be here to stay for several more cycles, and for some schools, I think it's here to stay for good. And so that's another strategy the colleges are embracing. Strategy number 4, I think I saw it this year, although I don't have the hard data yet to confirm it. I think, though, that this could be a good time to be an international applicant for private universities, or a out-of-state / international applicant for public universities. So what we saw was international enrollments dropping 16% in 2020. That was a huge financial loss or a hit to many, many colleges who have become addicted to that money. Throw in the fact that if you're looking at demographics in the United States, perhaps in Japan as well, from what I've been reading, what you've got right now is a shrinking pool of high school students that are either a shrinking pool in general, fewer kids, and then even within that population, fewer kids that can afford to go to college or are thinking about going to college. The only way for many of these American universities to survive is to continue to get a nice stream of applicants and students at both the undergraduate and graduate level internationally. So I think that what we might see in the cycle coming up for the class of 22 is refocused energy on the international student populations. And then if you're working at a public university like the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, perhaps you're refocusing your energy not just on international students, but out-of-state students. Those are the students that you can charge more for. So that's another kind of thing that I'm seeing, and that's a strategy that I'm either seeing already or I'm predicting will happen. Okay, so I've given you all kind of a business lesson on what it's like to be Dean of Admissions. And what it's like is it's a good job and you want to keep your job. And you do that by filling up the dorm beds. You do that by completing that freshman class. So COVID created a chaotic environment, and you became very much caught up in enrollment management and yield protection. So if you're working at a private university that offers early decision, you embrace a strategy that loads up on EDs. In the regular decision round, if you've done it right, you've got a lot of your class filled up. You admit a lot of elite kids. You don't know what their yield is, but you're going after the big fish, the high-flying students, and you create massive wait lists. If you don't get the yield needed to complete your class from these elite kids that you've admitted, you go to the wait list and just almost phone call by phone call, email by email, you're pulling students off the wait list that fit the categories that you're looking for. In the entire process then, what you've got is a high yield coming off the wait list, a guaranteed yield with your early decision admits, and the only uncertain part of your yield is in that regular decision application pool. Okay, that was just a nice masterclass on what it's like to be Dean of Admissions. If anybody wants to be a Dean of Admissions, reach out. I'll be like, here's how you get one of those jobs. The problem with being Dean of Admissions is it takes a while to get there. You have to kind of start off as an admissions officer, and I'm telling you, those jobs don't pay very much. You won't be living in Manhattan. You'll be renting for a long time. Okay, so lessons learned. What am I advising students right now, or what would I advise a 16 or 17-year-old getting ready to go through this process? All right, so first things first, you just got to be honest with yourself. You've got to look at your numbers, SAT, ACT included or not included. You've got to look at the reality of some elite schools, and you've got to create an effective early application plan. You've got to, you do heavy research on your schools. Know the schools, their admit rates, and create a plan that makes sense. Do not sit there and think that Santa Claus is going to just come through with that MIT admit when we know the reality. So one of the things I've really been encouraging students to do is create that effective early admissions plan. Now, if you do your research, I'm telling you, there are bargains out there. There are amazing universities that are there for the taking. Last year, meaning the class of 2020, look at Emory University in Atlanta is a top pre-med research. This is a top university for business as well. This is a top-notch university. They had a 31% early decision admit rate, 31% for Emory. That's a bargain. For those students that want to study business and finance, maybe instead of lining up at Penn Wharton or USC Marshall, take a look at Boston College, Lynch School of Business, an amazing location, gorgeous campus, Division I sports. You're in one of the best undergraduate cities in the world, and they had a 41% ED admit rate. These were your bargains for the bargain shoppers, the kids that went this route. Like, that's what I mean by doing your research and finding the best path. I would avoid that restrictive early action option to Harvard, Yale, or Stanford. And you might be like thinking, well, the whole reason why I'm sitting in on this talk is because this guy worked at Stanford at one time. I just think it's such a risky card to play. And in the process of applying early to Harvard, Yale, or Stanford, or Princeton, if they offered this year, I think there's a good chance you're going to get either denied or deferred. And now you're in the regular pool, and now you've lost your advantage with those ED schools. An economist would call that, I believe they would call that the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of applying early to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford is very, very high. I really don't encourage, even my super bright kids in California, I don't encourage them to apply restrictive early action unless they're very comfortable with their public schools on the list, the schools that don't offer an ED program. I think that this is a time to be a rational decision maker out there. And I know that most parents are turning to their 17-year-olds and saying, it's time for you to be rational. And the 17-year-olds are like, yeah, no, that's not how my brain is wired quite yet in life. But try and be rational and understand opportunity costs. If you apply early to Harvard and don't get in, don't sit there and assume Carnegie Mellon, which is an ED program, Duke, which is an ED program, Northwestern is an ED program. Don't assume that they're just waiting for you at that restaurant to seat you. My guess is that restaurant's going to be pretty full. Next, when filling out your application or working on your essays, pay close attention to yield questions. I think that there's an awful lot of emphasis, and people charge lots of money, like, let me help you with your college essay, and that's all good and fine. But I think that the most important question, if the school asks it, is the why question. A why question is, by its very nature, a yield question. The college is basically measuring not your writing ability, but your ability to set forth a plan as far as like, if you admit me to your school, here's what I will do. Here's my academic plan. More importantly, they're measuring your enthusiasm. You know, I want to basically get the feeling that you've researched my school, that the school is a good fit for you, and if I admit you, you will definitely come. So those why questions are very, very important. Underline that very 3 or 4 times. Chicago's why question is probably, for those thinking about University of Chicago, I cannot emphasize enough how important the why Chicago answer is. Taking a deep breath, you've got to also demonstrate your interest in the schools. So as you're doing your research, you know, attend an online information session. You know, leave that electronic footprint. Communicate with admissions officers if they visit your school or if they do an online presentation. Become an expert on each university on your list. That is something that I would say that students need to do. For the students that are about to go through the cycle again next year, be ready for wait lists. At the same time, after what I've seen this year, I'm not super optimistic. If you're on the wait list at a university that offered an early decision option, my guess is that wait list might be a yield protection strategy. My guess is that wait list is very deep, and I'm not super optimistic you'll get pulled off of that wait list. You know, I'm not. I think that the wait list year was 2020, the COVID year. That was where even top schools were going to the wait list super early. I don't think that the deans of admissions liked that. And so they opted, they're still going to create these big wait lists, but I'm not super optimistic. Unless, and I don't want this to happen, but unless kind of COVID rears its ugly head once again, disrupting the flow of international applicants coming into the United States, or impacting decision-making by families as they've gotten their admit offer. You know, like, oh, I don't want to travel far from home or things like that. So be prepared for lots of wait lists. But again, my general feeling right now about wait lists is I don't know. I don't think colleges want to rely on them very much, if at all. Okay, all right. So I'm talking to you from California. Maybe some of you are in California. So what about California? What did I see this year? And how is this kind of a reflection of what we just saw with COVID? All right, so California produces a huge college-going population. And while not everyone in California is wealthy, I would also argue that California is one of those economic zones where colleges love to recruit kids from, because there's a lot of full pay families here. You know, you're talking about Silicon Valley, you're talking about San Francisco, you're talking about Los Angeles, San Diego, Inland Valley, where there's farming money. I mean, this is a diverse state filled with lots of teens and filled with parents that have the money to pay or can afford the tuition. Not always, but there's that. COVID's impact on yield has also been interesting. What I am seeing right now, and more unofficial, but with some data to back it up, is I think a lot of California kids and a lot of California families, I think COVID's impacted their thinking quite a bit regarding college and the distance they want to travel for college. I think my best, maybe my best piece of evidence there is the USC, University of Southern California, where I believe that they've been over enrolled now for a couple of years in a row. They're getting their admissions models aren't predicting yield accurately, and they're getting too many kids that say that they want to come to USC. Now you might be thinking, well, that's not a problem. That's a good thing. You're like that restaurant with a lot of people that want to eat there. Well, the reality is that you can be too popular, whether it is a restaurant or a university. And when a university over-enrolls, particularly for 1, 2, 3 years in a row, you have to compensate. You have to create smaller classes the next year. The universities don't have room for housing. The universities don't, they're not elastic things that can kind of like, oh, we have a big class, we'll expand automatically. The connection between college admissions and the housing department, the connection between the admissions office and the housing department at the university, that's like the infamous like red phone during the Cold War, that hotline that you pick up to talk during an emergency. There's only so many beds. You never want to under-enroll, but it's also very bad for a dean of admissions job if they over-enroll. We've got, where are we going to put these kids? Now, I've got firsthand evidence of this from years ago. My wife went to Boston University, and she told me that BU was over-enrolled, and she spent time, and BU paid the price for this, like living in a Marriott hotel while they figured out housing. I promise you, colleges are not budgeting to put freshmen in Marriott hotels. That's not what you want. So what I think you're seeing in California, I think, is a lot of kids that might be getting these offers in Texas or in Georgia or in New York, but I think that they are slightly reluctant to leave California, and that if they get a good UC offer, or if they get admitted to a private university that they like, I think they're opting to stay closer to home. I don't have the data, but I think this might also be true for kids in New York or Virginia, where it's like, COVID really, I think, sent shockwaves for people. Some people had kids attending universities very far from home, and I think that became problematic, or it just made them very uncomfortable. I think that COVID's made maybe people reevaluate family a bit. And I know professionally, like just the desire to get on a plane and travel and kind of get back into that sort of feels much less exciting, So, although that does not mean I will not deny a crimson back trip to Seoul, Korea, or New Zealand. I'll be there in a heartbeat. But I think that what you're seeing here are some schools that are struggling to understand their yield. USC is one of them. I think the UC system here in California, again, I don't have hard data yet, although I hope to within the next couple of months. I mean, we saw some really interesting decision making as a school like UC Irvine, which is, while a wonderful university, I can't say it's one of the elite UCs. Well, boy, oh boy, they really, were waitlisting lots of kids, denying lots of kids, just really unpredictable stuff. And I think that the California schools and the UC system, it's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on. I think that those schools could be even more difficult. I can say with a degree of certainty that I'm positive next year that USC is going to get even harder to be admitted into because they're over-enrolled. And because there's a point where you have to get if you have back-to-back classes that are too big, you need a class that then is smaller. There's no getting around it. So keeping our eye on California and the UC system is going to be important. Now, my final bit for the UC system, though, and now I'm talking publics with the UCs, not private, is I'm going to go back to international and out-of-state students. There's also a huge budget crisis in California. Surprise, surprise, it's been true every year since I was born in 1964. It's like, I feel like California is always looking for more money. The best way for the UC system to make money or make extra money is to admit a large number of out-of-state or international students. So what am I thinking is going on here? I think that if I were advising an out-of-state or an international student, I would definitely say you've got to look at the UCs. I think that they're going to want more students because they're going to want your money. If I'm advising an in-state California kid, I'm like, I just have no faith in the predictability of the UCs. And I'm back to like, let's look at some of these private schools that offer an ED program to see what you think. Now, the third set of schools that's not here is the Cal State system, for those familiar with the Cal State system. And they actually saw a 5% drop in applications. So I think that there are still some good bargains on the Cal State side if you're a California person or California resident. So it's a few things there about California. Let me just check my time. We've got 206 people, so I don't think I lost too many of you. And before I turn things back over to Silicon Valley Forum, I just want to retreat back to the slide where I talk about early plans to make sure that we all understand kind of what I was talking about there. And that strategy of applying early decision. And early, here are your options. Most universities run either an early decision, early action, or a single choice early action. The exception here would be large public universities. Those are taxpayer funded, and they're not going to get they're not going to get too caught up in, or they're not going to really run an ED program. Early decision is a binding program. If admitted, you're expected to go there. Early decision is a great way for an admissions office to protect their yield and get guaranteed yield. It's often a place where you get a lot of full pay students. Now, you might come across early action programs. That would be programs like MIT, Caltech, Georgia Tech, University of Michigan. Early action is non-binding, and it really doesn't give an applicant a huge statistical advantage. If I have future engineers out there listening, I sure as heck am sending out a ton of early action applications to Illinois, Purdue, Georgia Tech, MIT, Caltech. I'm flooding the rivers with early action applications wherever I can find them, because in engineering, particularly in engineering, computer science software are so hard to find. But by and large, from a yield protection strategy, it doesn't do much for me if I'm a dean of admissions. Single choice early action schools are Harvard, Yale, Princeton, I think, and Stanford. And I said I think because Princeton canceled it last year, but I think they're returning this year to their restrictive early action program. And restrictive early action or single choice early action means that if admitted, you don't have to come to my school. They're not worried about yield. They're going to have an 82, 83, 84% yield. If admitted, you don't have to come to my school, but you cannot apply to other private universities. So you cannot have a restrictive early action application to Stanford and an early decision to Duke. That would be the equivalent of going on a date and then marrying someone else that afternoon. It's not good. So restrictive early action has got that huge opportunity cost, and I'm just not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of it. So I think that sort of sums up some things. I'm going to go back down to my student advice before I turn it over to Q&A. Understand opportunity cost, work on those why questions, do your research. Yeah, be prepared for those wait lists, not sure what to make of them. I think also, you know, my last bit would be for the engineers out there. I think that if you are applying engineering computer science, you've really got to work closely with an advisor, because it's getting so hard and those programs are becoming so deep that, you know, and quite frankly, most of your ED programs are small private schools that don't necessarily offer elite engineering computer science programs. You know, those are expensive programs to run. You either need to be a very wealthy private school like Stanford, MIT, Caltech, or you need that taxpayer funding, which is why with a lot of the engineers I work with, the comp sci engineering kids, we don't apply ED anywhere because they want Illinois Urbana-Champaign or Purdue or Michigan or Cal Berkeley or UT Austin or Georgia Tech. You know, that's actually what their top choices are. So we don't really do that. We tend to send out lots of early action applications along those lines. Okay, that's sort of what went down this year in the process. You learned about ED, EA, yield protection strategies, a little bit on essay writing when I talked about the why essay, but I think that's a whole other different workshop. And for the novices out there, remember that there's two parallel paths or university systems in the United States. There's the private schools, which use the common application, where you generally have that ED option. Then there's the public schools that are taxpayer funded, often have their own application, never offer early decision. Cal Berkeley has no early decision. Purdue does not have an early decision. UT Austin does not have an early decision. They're taxpayer funded, and early decision is not fair to those people that have been paying taxes but still can't afford college. All right, so I've either confused you or you all want to be admissions deans. I don't know. I'm going to do a stop share and I'll really turn it over to questions now. And I hope that you found it informative.
Cool, that was amazing. Thanks, Marty. That was quite insightful, because we always think about the application process from a student point of view. Now we understand how admission officers actually consider those applications. That's great. We've got a couple of questions in the chat column.
Sure.
How many EDs do you recommend to apply?
Well, when you're getting married, how many people can be, you know, Will, when you get married, how many significant others can be walking down the aisle to meet you?
One, ideally.
Right. Well, ideally and legally here in the United States. So yeah, it's just one. You can't, you cannot marry multiple universities. So the whole idea behind ED is that it's guaranteed yield. As an admissions dean, I know that you're coming to my school. So to apply to multiple EDs would actually be against the rules. That means you're not committing. Again, that's almost like, going on dates the morning of the wedding ceremony. It's not, you can't do that. So so I'm going to recommend one. That was an easy question. I've got that. You can only apply to one early decision school.
Yeah, cool. From Ray Zhang, does this mean apply for financial aid will reduce the chances of admission since schools like full pay students?
Yeah, so if you're an international student, is this student international or domestic?
Not sure.
Okay, I'm going to assume that you're international. If you are an international student that has financial need, I strongly encourage you to get help developing a college list that's built around colleges that put aside money for international students. Not every college does, that's for sure. But yes, if you're an international student that has financial need, it can impact negatively admissions decisions. That's just the reality. And it can impact domestic students too. It's not just an international thing. No, not being able to pay for college can backfire on your application to some private schools, because again, private schools do have a bottom line to worry about.
Any difference between in-state and out-of-state?
If it's a public university, not a private, a public university, yes. Again, there's going to be a huge difference in fees or tuition that is charged. For private universities, a school like Stanford, Harvard, even though they're in California or Massachusetts, they don't get caught up in in-state or out-of-state. It's the same tuition-based price across the board. The only time geography is taken into account is when you're just trying to create a diverse group of students at the undergraduate level.
Mm-hmm. Cool. A follow-up question from Ray. If a student is a rising 10th grader, do you still suggest to take SATs with this test optional policy?
Yeah, I feel like, I'm going to use a gambling term. I kind of feel like the exams now, it's house money. I would definitely still take it. And if you do well, submit it. If you don't do well, no one needs to know. Very much my approach to dating. If it doesn't go well, you don't need to talk about it. So, but if it goes well, let the college know. So I would absolutely encourage kids. I'm still encouraging my students to take the test. And we report it if it goes well. If we don't report it, it doesn't go. Then don't report it if it doesn't go well. Not hard to do.
Cool. A question from Al. Any insights about transfer students for 2022?
Yeah, I think that
you suggest a gap year.
Yeah, no, I think that well, gap year is different than transfer. I think that if you're looking to transfer in, there's a lot of great options. If you've got your eye on, let's say, the UC system, like University of California, then I would say, gosh, the best way to ensure a transfer is you attend one of the top junior colleges in California and you set up an agreement and start with the transfer process after your first year. Transferring to a private university like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Northwestern, really, really, really tough, because they don't have a lot. Transferring in means somebody has to leave, and they don't really lose a lot of kids. Those are my thoughts on transferring. If you don't get the college that you like, I would look at a good junior college and set up your transfer agreement.
Cool. Next question: do colleges have a fixed percentage admission rate set aside for international students?
No.
In other words, do they have a quota or something like this?
Yeah, no, they don't. They don't. I never sat in on any meetings where there was like an exact numeric quota attached to any particular country. I absolutely did sit in on meetings where they said, gosh, we don't have many kids from this part of the world. Let's see if we can get that. But I never sat in on any sort of fixed quota. Now, was there a fixed quota on international students that had financial need? And my guess would be that for many universities, the answer would be yes. They would budget X number of dollars that might be for, let's say, 10, 12, 13, 14 kids. And that's where you might see like a quota, not necessarily based on geography, just based on numbers alone.
Mm-hmm. Cool, awesome. We've got 4 minutes left, so we're gonna answer as many as we can. Next one, do colleges mainly compare you against the other students in your grade at your high school?
Yeah, well, you're generally read within the context of your school. So, there's some, comparison there, I guess. You're kind of like, okay, If I read an applicant from a high school in New York and the student has taken 6 APs, and then the next applicant I've got, the student, they both have great grades, but the second student has 1 AP. I mean, automatically I'm like, what's going on here? Like this student A clearly challenged him or herself more than student B. So in that way, there can be a bit of a comparison there. Okay. You kind of read within the context of your school. Yeah.
It's sort of put you in a competitive environment to think about this question, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking around and you're saying, gosh, I'm applying to this elite school, and within the context of my graduating class, I count 5 kids in the class that are better than me that are applying to the same school, I'd probably be like, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Next question, what are the back-end schools for computer science major? Good, but a little bit easy to apply. Any suggestions?
Yeah, well, my general feeling on and I don't know where the student is asking from, geographically. I just think that Purdue, I'll step back by saying Purdue is, I lived for a long time in Stanford, Palo Alto area, and on Saturday football season, you'd see the flags of the different colleges. I was always stunned at how the number of UIUC and Purdue flags there were. So that means that people that went to those schools that are now working in the Valley at Google or Oracle or something like that. I think Lehigh is another strong engineering school in rural Pennsylvania. I think University of Utah has got a stunning CS department, and I think that's where Adobe Systems came out of, and that the founder of Adobe gave Utah quite a bit of money. I think that Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in the central part of California is outstanding. I think that Arizona State, I mean, if you can handle the hot weather, I think Arizona State's an excellent CS school.
Cool. Does the yield concern also apply to transfer students?
Now, transfer is going to be a little bit different. You're not so worried about yield there because it doesn't really go into your rankings at all.
Okay. How do we set up a consultation with Martin? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's I just am a speaker. I am a speaker.
If you need more information about application processes on essays or any kind of any things related to your application, you can set up a consult with Crimson Education. And then if we can't answer any of the questions, we'll always consult to Martin for a good answer. Martin, thanks a lot. I guess that's our time. We look forward to working with you again.
Sure. I hope the audience was a little different than maybe what you expected, but I hope you enjoyed it. And that's like information hot off the press. So I'm glad you found it interesting. I hope you all did. And it was wonderful talking to everybody.
Thanks, Martin. 那Martin 现在就是我们大家如果有任何问题的话，可以扫描下边那些没有这个答复的问题呢。我们可以大家扫描那个二维码，就是百家谈 Crimson 讲座的那个二维码之后，我们会把这些问题发给 Martin， 然后让他回答之后，再给大家去一一的在群里边去做这些解答。Philip，
你有没有 Q&A 环节用中文给大家再对接10到15分钟，还是说我们现在就结束了？
可以啊，我先找一些我可以回答的问题，我可以给大家先回答一下，然后这样吧，我先给大家介绍一下 Crimson Education， 然后介绍完之后呢，我再大家有任何问题的话也可以回答一下。刚才提给 Martin 的问题，Philip 一会儿你可以这个给我一个文档，这个输出一个文档，应该有这个问题的，然后我回答完之后我发到大家群里边。
好的，这样大家感兴趣的话，先扫描这个二维码，在群里我们保持联系。另外，在2点15，我们这个讲座正式结束之后，我这边会分享一下我们硅谷百家谈推出的教育成长俱乐部这个事情。如果大家感兴趣的话，欢迎留在这个会议室。谢谢。Will， 要么你share。
我 share 一下我的屏幕。
OK。
Philip， 你可以看到我的屏幕吗？
可以。
OK， 我现在就是简单给大家介绍一下 Crimson Education。你看到的是 Crimson logo 吧 ，Philip？
对。
Crimson 呢，其实我们是一家帮助学生去申请，最开始的时候是帮助大家去申请，英国和美国的这些顶级大学的这样的一个机构，所以我们也会包括英国的大学，如果大家感兴趣的话，也可以找我们来聊一聊。那我们呢是这个 NACAC， 就是国家大学申请联盟申请这个顾问联盟的这个成员，也是国际大学申请顾问联盟的成员。大家可以在这个像福布斯啊、这个 Huffington Post 这样的这个媒体上去找到关于 Crimson 的一些消息。那我们在稍后呢，我们会有一些这个免费的资源介绍给大家。我现在给大家简单介绍一下 Crimson 的一些基本的状况。我们呢现在是在全球30几个国家有办公室，包括北京和上海也都有我们的办公室。然后呢，我们现在全球是有500个以上的这个全职的员工。包括3000名以上的这些老师啊，你的辅导这个导师，同时在线的学生我们大概有5000个学生左右。然后在2019年，我们一共是给大家上了大概20万节这样的课程，但在2020年的时候，这个课程可能会这个数字会翻倍，但是我们现在还没有这个数据。然后在每一节课的时候呢，我们会学生会给我们的老师去打分，那这个好评率大概是在98%左右。稍后呢，我再给大家介绍一下 Crimson 的这个这些怎么用科技把这些学生去很好的管理起来的。Crimson 呢，其实它可以是一个教育机构，但是它也可以说是一个比较好的一个生态系统，就是不管是在学术方面还是在其他的方面，你都可以在这里找到一个很好的一个答案，很好的帮助。首先呢 ，Crimson 在这个学术上面，我们大概有这样6项的服务。第一个就是 academic tutoring， 就是你的补习，你在学校里学的任何一个这个学习系统、学习体系，我们都可以给你提供补习的帮助。第二个呢，就是这个，如果你去参加这个各种各样的比赛，比如说奥林匹克数学呀，这个美国数学的竞赛呀，所有的这些竞赛类的东西，我们都可以给你去提供辅导和帮助。再有就是 SAT、ACT 的 Mastery Course， 这个是我们自己开发的一系列的这个培训的课程，主要是由我们那些已经拿过满分的学生，还有他们的老师共同来开发的这样的一个课程体系，可以教给大家。再有一个就是大学的入学考试，你比如说你去考一些医学院呢、法律啊，或者一些入学的考试，那这些考试我们也会给你去进行培训。然后语言的培训，加上最后一个是 Crimson Global Academy， 就是 Crimson 是由我们自己在新西兰和在美国注册的私立的高中，在这里边你可以选择 AP 的课程，你可以选择 A Level 的课程，或者是其他的一些这个比较小众的课程，也都是在线的一个高中里边有，这个是在2国的教育部都有注册的。你一样可以在高中毕业，你可以选择有全职或者是兼职的这样的这个学习的状况都是可以的。再有一个呢，像申请美国的大学，它会比较需要这种全面发展的这样的学生，所以课外活动就会变得非常重要。这个除了这个学术之外，课外活动应该是最重要的一项，因为不管你是在填 Common App 申请表的时候，还是要在未来你写你的文书的时候，没有课外活动这一项，是没有办法让你自己从这个所有的申请者里边脱颖而出的。像刚才 Martin 讲过了，就是你要把自己放在一个对比的环境当中去申请这些大学，所以不管你做了什么，大学的要求是怎么样的，你始终要看其他人在做什么，那你怎么能在所有人里边脱颖而出才可以？像杜克大学这样，刚才他讲过了 ，regular decision 的时候已经有44000人去申请了，那这个竞争力其实还是非常多的。所以在课外活动方面，我们有课外活动的这个辅导，有领导力的辅导。然后社会企业家精神的这种辅导，包括 Crimson 内部会有很多的这种这个实习的机会，你都可以把它变成一个社会实践的一个部分，或者是说你的课外活动的一部分。一会儿我会继续给大家讲有哪些这个更多的资源。Crimson 呢还有一个叫我们的课外活动的一个集市，这个相当于是有很多机构会跟你说，我告诉你怎么去做课外活动，我教你怎么去做，但是你真正的要做什么样的项目呢？你在哪儿去找这些项目去做呢 ？Crimson 是有一个这样的平台，一会儿我会给大家介绍一下这个平台的好处在于哪里。然后最后呢 ，Crimson 有一个我们自己的这个科研的这个学院， 如果你对某一个方向上有比较深入的了解，然后你又掌握了足够多的知识的话，那我们就可以去建立这样的一个小组，去让你和我们的这个教授啊，或者是我们这个学院里的一些导师去共同去完成这样的一个科研项目。其实呢 ，Crimson 我现在给大家介绍几个 Crimson 跟其他的公司不太一样的点。首先呢 ，Crimson 在全世界的范围内呢，我们有个叫 Community， 这个呢其实就是所有 Crimson 的学生会在这个 Community 里面，很快我们会把这个 Community 也开放给更多的这个大众，就是在这里边你可以去讨论不同的话题，比如说 Harvard Application 2021，在这个里边，比如说你现在看到有几百人去参与这样的一个讨论，就是你在申请这些大学的时候有什么样的新的信息啊，有什么样的事情大家可以去讨论，或者是你有各种各样的这个不同的课外活动，你也可以把它在这里边去跟大家去探讨，所以它形成的是一个全世界范围的一个学生的一个社群，在这里边你可以更好的看到别的国家的学生也在做怎么样的这个准备。还是在这里边有不同的这个群组，你可以去建立你自己的群组，然后让别人加入进来去参加这个话题的讨论，也都是可以的。然后呢，这个是我刚才讲的这个 Crimson Internship Programs， 这里边这4个这个公司呢，只不过是一个缩影而已。像那个 Unfiltered， 这个 Philip 应该比较熟，就是前段时间你看见那个 Eric 袁。和我们进行的一个访谈，就是在这样的一个平台里进行的。那它现在是 Crimson 集团的一个部分，所以上面有很多工作的机会啊，包括我们对 Richard Branson 就是维珍公司的总裁进行采访啊，还有一些大咖。那他这里边有很多的这个实习的机会，也可以有让 Crimson 的这个学生来进行。Lashp Pro 它是一个做这个化妆品的公司，Remark。一个网络公司 ，Amelia 是一个做机器人的一个公司，所以在这些公司里边，我们都会有比较比较好的实习的机会，可以让高中生来真正的参与进来的。那还有很多的这个不同的 partnership， 这个 US News 我想给大家着重的去介绍一下。大家很多都知道，其实全世界一共就有这么2家。发布大学这个排名比较这个权威性的，一个是 QS， 一个就是 US News and World Report。这个现在US News 它所有关于大学申请的这些内容，基本上都是 Crimson Education 来提供的。为什么我们可以去做这样的一个事情，去给这样的一个大学排名的网站去提供大学申请相关类文章内容的这个平台？那就是我们一会儿要分享的。其实，在 Crimson 你可以拿到很多这样免费的这个关于大学申请的这些资源。这个就是我们跟他的这个合作。同时呢，每年 Crimson 也会跟哈佛大学的校报去进行一些 essay competition， 做文书的比赛。这个就是每一年都会有，大概是3月份来进行，大家可以这个持续的关注一下。下边呢，我要给大家介绍一下 Crimson 的一些免费的资源，大家有时间的时候可以去 Crimson 的官方网站去看一下。第一个呢，就是 webinars and workshop， 像我们这样的 webinars 和 workshop， 以前呢在也做过，大家可以上我们的网站上去看这些这个录像啊或者视频都可以。一共有300多场这个 workshop， 大概有50几个这样的话题，我们是已经探讨过的，可以到我们网站上去看一下。还有一个就是你在 Apple 或者是这个 Spotify 这些主流的这个 podcast 网站上，你都可以找到 Crimson 的 podcast，叫 Top of the Class。这里边呢，我们是采访了好多这个。比如说像 Martin 这样的这个前招生官 Crimson 的以前的学生，他们的路径是怎么样的？然后已经毕业了这些 Crimson 学生，他们在谷歌呀，在各个这个公司里边的这个发展的一些状况，可以给大家一些很好的这个启示。像 Crimson Access Opportunity， 这个就是如果你是足够的优秀，但是你这个家庭条件不太允许你去使用 Crimson 这样的一个服务的话，那你也可以跟我们取得联系，拿你的成绩，然后还有家庭的一些这个财政的状况，去跟我们去聊一下，然后我们也会有这样 Crimson 的相当于一个 scholarship 一个奖学金这样的一个机制。再有呢，到我们的官方网站上，你可以看有 SAT、ACT 的这个转换器，然后英美大学的这个计算器，你都可以上面去把你自己的这个学术的成绩啊，把你的课外活动的成绩 放到上面去，然后它还会给你预估一个大概你现在的水平是在哪些大学的一个水平线上。但这个不是100%的准确，只能给你提供一个参考。如果想了解更多信息的话，就可以跟我们取得联系，去约1对1的咨询就可以了。然后这个是我们的 YouTube channel， 大家可以上去看，有上千个这个不同的这个视频，比如说这个哈佛医学院的学生一天是怎么过的，然后各个大学各个区域的一些不同的问题都会在这些视频里边有这样的这个表述。这个就是我刚才跟大家说的这个课外活动的集市，在这上面大家可以看到，这有一个1875，但是这个数字是不断的在上升的，有可能下降，因为我们这个市场呢是由 Crimson 的学生他们去把自己的做的课外活动的小组放到网上去，然后如果你想加入的话，那在全世界的范围之内你都可以加入，或者是说我们有自己做的一些 competition， 我们也会把它放到这里边。所以这个数字会在不断的去增加，你可以到这上面来选择，有很多是你是不是 Crimson 的学生你都可以参加的，但是也有一小部分是只有成为了 Crimson 学生之后才可以参加的一些项目，但大家可以去看一下。另外一个呢就是 University Profiles， 像刚才 Martin 讲过了，其实 Yield 是他们考核的很重要的一个标准，他们是在做生意的，所以你要申请各个大学之前，你要先足够的去了解这些大学。那你可以上我们的网站上去看，比如说 US Colleges 每个大学他们的状况是什么样的，他们有什么样的传统啊，什么样的这个 superstition， 什么样的这个习惯，都是在上面可以找得到。还有一个呢，这个就是我们的这个 Crimson Blog， 你在这个上面可以找到关于 admission news。test prep， 课外活动啊，这个文书啊，所有相关信息。在新冠的期间呢，其实我们全球好多这个学生都是靠我们的 blog 来了解新冠对于这个大学申请的一些影响的。在 Crimson 呢，其实我们是一个对于学生的这个成绩要求非常极致的。大家可以看到，这是我们的一个 Slack， 一个内部的一个沟通的一个 channel。每年到这个申请季的时候，我们都会所有各个国家的 country manager， 各个国家的这个导师都会在这里边分享他们学生都进到哪些大学里边去了。所以大家可以看到下边有一些小的国旗啊，所有的这些东西，这就是我们庆祝我们学生的成绩的一个很重要的一个渠道。这里边呢是我们今年在这个一个华人学生叫 Andrew， 他考到哈佛的一个简单的一个总览吧。刚才 Martin 也说了，如果在同一个高中里边，如果一个人学了一个 AP 的课程，那另外一个学了6个，他可能会觉得学了6个那个人会更加努力一些，能力会更强一些。那这个学生呢，他是考了17个 IP 的课程，这个科目。然后又做了很多课外活动，像这些课外活动，他是发明了一个这个小提琴自动调弦的机器，就是他把对小提琴的热爱和自己对 coding 的这种热情综合到一起，然后做了这样的一个课外活动，他有了自己的这个发明和专利。那下边是几个 student 的这个案例。我们其实 Crimson 我先给大家看一下 Crimson 今年的这个被录取的这些数字吧。美国前50名大学今年一共是665个，这个数字可能会更高一些。那常春藤学校大概有这个60几个，然后英国前10名的大学呢，今年是有211个，这是今年的成绩。那往年呢，大家可以看到351个到常春藤的，然后这个总体美国前50名是2200个左右吧。然后这个是我们的这个强大的校友网络，在各个不同的大学都有 Crimson， 所以你在加入 Crimson 之后，我们会有一项非常好的一个东西，就是不管你要去哪所大学，好的大学，你都可以跟我们在校的学生去进行一个1对1的咨询。这个大学里哪个教授比较好，哪个是这个餐厅比较好吃，你都可以了解得到。下面呢是我们学生毕业了之后所去到的一些公司。如果大家对 Crimson 有什么更多的想了解的东西呢，可以随时跟我们去取得联系。刚才那个群也可以，或者一会儿我给大家一个2维码，直接加他们去咨询也可以。在所有 Crimson 的学生，我们都会用自己 这个开发的这样的一个叫 Crimson App 这样的一个软件，去来监督学生的这个进度，包括这里边像你什么时候可以给老师发信息，你可以去看你都有什么课程，你有哪些任务管理，然后你的整体的学习的计划是怎么样的，你的进度是什么样，所有的学生和家长都可以看得到。然后我们还有一些课外活动的数据库，大数据智能选校的系统都可以给大家去应用到。